From career-ending injuries to making TikToks, from starring in movies to getting completely banned from every wrestling company, this is what happened to every forgotten WWE wrestler of the PG era, starting with someone who was supposed to be the next Rey Mysterio. Cara might be the biggest failed investment in WWE history. Triple H himself flew to Mexico City, held a press conference, and introduced the American wrestling fans to Mystico, the biggest professional wrestling star in all of Mexico. This man had literal comic books based on him. His merchandise outsold everyone in CMLL. When he came to the WWE, he was repackaged as Sin Cara, and the plan was to replace an aging Rey Mysterio with a fresh and younger luchador. However, that plan fell apart almost immediately. Sin Cara went straight to the main roster without ever learning the WWE style, without picking up a word of English, and wearing a new mask he could barely see out of. The botches started in his very first match and never stopped. The company presented his matches in yellow and blue lighting, partly for atmosphere, partly to distract from the chaos inside the ring. Then came the wellness violation just 3 months in, which led to a 30-day suspension. WWE kept the character on TV anyway by quietly putting Hunico under the mask. When the original Sin Cara returned, they turned it into a storyline, which led to a mask versus mask match. But by that point, nobody trusted the original Sin Cara in a top spot anymore. He lingered in the mid-card for 2 more years, racking up injuries and never finding his footing. WWE quietly released him in March 2014 without much fanfare. He went back to Mexico, wrestled in AAA, and eventually then returned to CMLL. Today, he's back to being a top star in Mexico, even signing with AEW and becoming part of the AEW World Trios Championship picture. But while Sin Cara's WWE chapter ended with a cultural mismatch, our next wrestler is a case of someone who had the right character, but the company never pulled the trigger. Tyler Breeze spent years in NXT building a standout character. He feuded with Sammy, Finn, and even Japanese legend Jushin Thunder Liger. He was an NXT hotshot for the better part of 3 years, and the crowd absolutely loved him. So when his main roster call-up finally came in October 2015, fans were genuinely excited. But it lasted about 6 months. Breeze debuted strong against Dolph Ziggler, but after that, creative had nothing for him. He bounced around Raw and SmackDown without direction, losing more than winning, never sniffing a title shot that mattered. The company eventually paired him with Fandango as Breezango. And honestly, the Fashion Police segments they did on SmackDown were some of the most entertaining content on the show in 2016 and 2017. The crowd adored them. They got championship shots, but they never got a major title run, and by 2018 they were shipped back down to NXT. In June 2021, WWE released both men as part of a round of budget cuts. Since then, he's wrestled occasionally on the independents, co-founded the Flatbacks Wrestling School in Florida with Sean Spears, and came back to WWE in a non-wrestling capacity, coaching at the Performance Center and co-hosting the Up Up Down Down gaming channel. He's even made some smart real estate investments and built a strong portfolio outside wrestling. He made a surprise return at NXT Homecoming in September 2025, and as of late 2025, he said he'd be open to coming back full-time if the opportunity presented itself. But at least Breeze got a decade in the company. The next guy on our list had a shorter, stranger, and far more frustrating ride. Some wrestlers fail because they can't get over. Alex Riley's problem was the opposite. He got over, and that didn't sit right with a top star. Riley showed up on the 2nd season of NXT in 2010 with a jock frat boy character and quickly caught the eye of The Miz, who made him his on-screen protege. Riley was ringside when Miz won the WWE Championship, and he was in Miz's corner during his WWE title reign leading to WrestleMania 27. On paper, he was just a sidekick. But Riley had genuine charisma, a good look, and a decent connection with the crowd. The break came in May 2011 when Miz publicly humiliated Riley on Raw one too many times, and Riley finally snapped, beating down his boss to a loud fan reaction. Over the next few weeks, his music was getting pops that most mid-carders could only dream of. He was main eventing Raw, standing across the ring from established stars, and everything pointed to a real push. But then, it just stopped. The widely reported reason is backstage heat with John Cena. Arn Anderson later confirmed there was a story circulating that Riley wasn't receptive when Cena tried to offer him advice, and in WWE's locker room culture, that gets back to management fast. Riley himself has acknowledged there was an incident involving a top star that derailed his career, and while he's never named names outright, no one who follows wrestling has missed the implication. He was quietly removed from television and spent 2 years making occasional live event appearances while working as a commentator on NXT and SmackDown pre-shows. He tried to fight his way back with a Twitter campaign and briefly got a storyline with Kevin Owens on NXT, but a knee injury derailed the momentum. By May 2016, WWE released him alongside several others. He wrestled a handful of indie dates years later, but his wrestling career was effectively over the day he crossed the wrong person in that locker room. Vladimir Kozlov had a menacing presence and a legit combat sports background. He steamrolled local talent, then moved up to bigger names, scoring wins over Jeff Hardy and even The Undertaker, something very few people in WWE history can claim. By November 2008, he was in the main event of Survivor Series challenging Triple H and Edge for the WWE Championship. Less than 8 months into his WWE run, and he was already in a title match on a major pay-per-view. That's an extraordinary trajectory. But the crowd never fully bought in. Part of it was timing, and part of it was that Kozlov had real limitations on the mic, and his matches, while physically imposing, lacked the excitement to hold an audience. After Survivor Series, the push stalled. He started losing, and the invincible monster image evaporated quickly. He was sent to ECW in 2009, which was already a sinking ship, and spent time in a forgettable faction with William Regal and Ezekiel Jackson. After ECW folded, he landed on Raw and got paired with Santino Marella in an entertaining tag team before WWE released him in 2011. After leaving, he pivoted to acting and built a solid secondary career, appearing in John Wick, The Punisher on Netflix, and other notable movies. He briefly returned to wrestling with TNA in 2023 and 2024, competing at their major events before retiring from in-ring competition. Outside the ring, Kozlov has remained in great shape and is also a successful businessman. However, Kozlov isn't the only forgotten wrestler from the late 2000s. You may recognize Evan Bourne from the clips of him getting RKO'd midair by Randy Orton. A 10-year indie veteran by the time he debuted on ECW in 2008, Bourne had developed a hybrid style pulling from Japanese, lucha libre, and European wrestling that made him unique. His finishing move, the Shooting Star Press, was so awesome that WWE gave him the Slammy Award for Best Finishing Maneuver in his very first year with the company. He floated between ECW and Raw for 3 years, getting periodic pushes that never quite stuck until 2011 when WWE finally found the right formula. They paired him with Kofi Kingston, and the two became Air Boom. Together, they won the Tag Team Championships and successfully defended it against The Miz and R-Truth, and then against Dolph Ziggler and Jack Swagger across multiple pay-per-views. It was the hottest Bourne had ever been, and for a few months it felt like he might finally get a genuine top-of-card push. But then came November 1st, 2011. WWE announced he had been suspended 30 days for his first wellness violation. Then, just 2 months after returning, he failed a second test in January 2012 and received a 60-day suspension. WWE quietly stripped Air Boom of the titles at a house show, and the writing was on the wall. On the day his second suspension was nearly over, Bourne was involved in a motorcycle accident that broke his foot in 4 places and dislocated it in 5. The injury required surgery and kept him out of action for an entire year. He finally returned in March 2013, but the company had moved on. WWE released him quietly in June 2014 without a farewell match or storyline. After leaving, Bourne, going by his real ring name Matt Seidel, rebuilt himself on the independents in Japan and eventually in TNA, where he won the Impact Grand Championship in 2017. He signed with AEW in 2020 and has been a steady presence there ever since, but never reached the heights of his indie days in the 2000s or his time in the WWE. Bourne's story is about bad luck piling on top of bad choices until there was no road back. But what happened to the next guy on our list is a completely different kind of tragedy. Enzo Amore had 0 prior wrestling experience when WWE signed him to NXT in 2012. He was just a guy from New Jersey who loved wrestling and had more personality than almost anyone in the building. And somehow, that was enough. He and his tag team partner Big Cass became the most entertaining act in NXT almost immediately. They won NXT Tag Team of the Year in 2015 and graduated to the main roster in April 2016, where they got one of the loudest debut pops in Raw history. Enzo was never a technical marvel between the ropes, but the crowd didn't care. He connected with fans in a way that can't be faked. However, huge problems were brewing behind the scenes. Enzo had a reputation as one of the most difficult and disrespectful people in the locker room. He talked constantly, never listened, and reportedly had such bad heat with the roster that Roman Reigns personally kicked him off the travel bus at one point. By 2017, WWE split him from Cass and moved him to the cruiserweight division, where Enzo, to his credit, immediately made himself the most hated heel on the brand. He won the Cruiserweight Championship, and for a moment, it seemed like the rebrand was working. But then came the misconduct allegations in 2018. WWE fired him immediately, with the title being subsequently vacated. Enzo fully denied the allegations, and in May 2018, the Phoenix Police Department closed the investigation due to insufficient evidence. But that didn't matter for his career. WWE was done, and so was his goodwill with the locker room. Since leaving, Enzo, now performing as Real One, pursued a rap career, wrestled in MLW, and made his TNA debut in 2025. He still has his charisma. He still has the gift of gab, but the stage he had in WWE will never come back. But while Enzo's fall was sudden and absolute, our next forgotten star's decline was the opposite, painfully slow and stretched out over years. Brodus Clay had worked as a bodyguard for Snoop Dogg before getting into wrestling and had an intimidating presence. He appeared on NXT, then got his main roster call-up as Alberto Del Rio's bodyguard before quietly being removed from TV for weeks after WrestleMania 27. When WWE spent months in late 2011 running vignettes hyping his return with ominous music and dark visuals, fans expected a monster. Instead, on January 9th, 2012, Brodus walked out wearing a red tracksuit, flanked by two dancing women in catsuits, shimmying his 375-pound frame down the ramp in front of a stunned arena. The Funkasaurus was born, and shockingly, it worked. The initial response was electric. Clay went on a 25-match winning streak, squashing opponents in seconds while the crowd laughed and danced along. He feuded with Dolph Ziggler, Big Show, and others, and by summer 2012, he was one of the most recognizable characters on the show. But former WWE writer Kevin Eck later confirmed that Vince McMahon himself killed the push because he could see Clay wasn't fully buying in. Vince reportedly felt Brodus was going through the motions rather than genuinely embracing the character, and he also wanted him to lose weight. His push quietly died, and by 2013, Clay had been reduced to a comedic tag team with Tensai called Tons of Funk. He appeared in the WrestleMania 30 Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal and lost. WWE released him on June 12, 2014. He went to TNA as Tyrus, then eventually left to join the NWA, where he was criticized for his slow in-ring style and basically became an online meme. However, his bigger reinvention happened entirely outside the ring. Since 2016, Clay has made frequent appearances on Fox News as a political commentator, appearing regularly on Gutfeld and other programs. While he has found some success outside the ring, Brodus Clay has never become the dominant monster wrestling fans hoped he would. However, Clay wasn't the only powerhouse from his era who was buried. You also had Ryback. And if you want to find out what happened to Ryback and other forgotten WWE wrestlers, check out this video next.